Hello, this is my last Module 13 case study, A Good Teacher Turns Bad for EDL 851. So to go ahead and kind of start off, this case study was about a teacher, Mrs. Horton, who has been teaching in a school in the district for a while, but within this particular school year, she has struggled. I think just personal reasons, things have been going on at home. So for this category, we're identifying the problem and kind of doing some data analysis to see what we could do. So to start off, Mrs. Horton, she, like I said, has been working in the district, but there was a change in behavior this year, and colleagues have noticed that there may be something going on at home. Mrs. Wilson is the school principal, and she has received multiple complaints about Mrs. Horton and from the students' parents that are in Mrs. Horton's class. Some of the parents are asking for their student to be switched out of that class, so Mrs. Wilson set up a conference to kind of meet and talk about what potentially they could do. And one of the parents of one of the students in Mrs. Horton's class was outraged at the meeting and kind of accused Mrs. Horton of things. And Mrs. Horton she responded, probably not in the most professional manner. And so the principal kind of stepped in and said, well, let's postpone this meeting. We'll wait. Let me kind of talk a little bit more with Mrs. Horton. What I know about this situation, so Mrs. Horton's behavior has definitely changed. She was a former teacher of the year, and things have just kind of gone off the rails for this year. So Mrs. Wilson, the school principal, is trying to discuss the situation with Mrs. Horton so that no rash decisions are being made right away. What we still need to know is that Mrs. Wilson had conducted observations and evaluations with Mrs. Horton. So kind of looking at the post conference meetings just to kind of see how Mrs. Horton was doing. I also think the observations and evaluations could have been helpful to kind of see how has anything changed from these evaluations. So just kind of looking at those, reflecting on them. Another thing we still need to know is what resources are available that we could maybe help Mrs. Horton and her students rather than right away just start taking kids out of the class. This next slide is the plan of action. So we're talking about the different steps to take to kind of better this whole situation and what kind of strategies we can implement. So first off, once again, I think having all of Mrs. Horton's evaluations and notes from her observations, that would be very helpful. That way they could even show when the parents are asking questions, they could kind of come about it rather than accusing or pointing fingers, but they could say, well, here are the observations that we conducted on these dates, and this is how it was in the classroom. I was there. There was proof of this. Another thing would be speaking with the administrators at the board office. Sometimes situations like these can get a little bit murky. So understanding what the proper protocol is, not only for Mrs. Horton and the school, but also when the parents are getting involved and when the parents are unhappy, what are things that we could do to kind of help them combat them and their attitude right now. So talking to the proper people, like people in HR that are at the district office. Also discussing with Mrs. Horton and making sure to listen to her side of the story. I think sometimes, at least from my own experience, administrators, they do take their side. Most of the time, they do take their side, the staff members' side. But sometimes I think if parents are persistent enough, the administrator can just kind of let certain things slide that other students wouldn't. Especially like Mrs. Wilson could just completely dismiss the parent, or it could go where she just terminated Mrs. Horton's job in the school because of these complaints. So understanding both sides of the story, I think, is very important. Another thing, and I know I'll mention this multiple times, but I think creating a plan of action, establishing a goal. I think if you take the step to meet with Mrs. Horton and say, hey, these are the things that have happened, and I understand things may be rough at home. I totally get that, but I think if we could work on setting a goal for this week, this month, and then finishing off the year, it could be very productive for not only Mrs. Horton, but her students. Category 3 is about resolving the issue. This would be, how can we go about fixing the situation for now, and then how can we continue to make sure this does not happen again. Not even just with Mrs. Horton, but any other teachers in the school. So providing training for the staff members, using PD appropriately, being effective with it, promoting the success of all students and staff members and the families within the school. I think communication is a huge part of an effective school. So making sure that all your staff members are on the same page when it comes to this kind of situation where if something's going on at home or if students and parents are unhappy, here's the proper protocol we need to follow. Once again, I think making sure not only, I know our school does our school handbook at the beginning of the year and we discuss certain things, but it's not something we continue to look back on throughout the year. So it could be effective for the principal, administrator, whoever is the one that's leading these things, to maybe set up PD throughout the year to say, hey, we're going to review the handbook. I understand you still know what the protocol is, but we've had situations arise that I think we just need a refresher course. And that would be very helpful, especially with Mrs. Horton and Mrs. Wilson right now. Category 4 is about debriefing the problem. So this is my own thinking. I think a school should be as successful as they can be. Fortunately, I personally have not had to deal with this. Obviously, everyone has parents that can be upset at certain times, but making sure that your staff members and your administrators are on the same page, they're backing one another up, they're understanding the sides of the story rather than just point fingers, is a huge thing in this situation. Understanding the school's expectations for staff behavior as well as student behavior and when families get involved. And then I know that I was very lucky to have observations and post observations where I can reflect on how the lesson went, kind of look over the evaluation from the administrator and see if I had any questions. And I think that is essential for a successful evaluation, is where the teachers have time to reflect with the administrator. Again, with debriefing the problem, sorry, I'm trying to, okay. These are my own feelings this time. So I 100% get Mrs. Horton's situation. Was it the most ethical situation morally? I think it could have been handled differently, but I understand things come up at home where it's too much to handle. Then coming to a stressful classroom where maybe there's students that just, they butt heads. So I can feel that empathetic part where I know taking on multiple things when things are getting complicated, but remembering to act ethical. Like, you are a professional. When you step into the building, you need to wear those shoes. So I also can understand the parents and students side. I know that students, if their teacher's yelling at them all the time, they can't do anything right, and she has a negative attitude, or he, school's not going to be fun. It's not going to make learning fun. The student's not going to have a very high success rate. So I can understand the parents' side where their student is just, they don't want that student in the class because it's holding them back. So I can understand both sides of this. The next one is what I was kind of valuing, what I was appreciating from this. So the relationships that I have with my staff members and my administrator, it just, upon looking at this case study, I can, reflecting on it, I think I'm very lucky that I know that my administrator has my back. We've had situations this year that parents have been unhappy, not just with my decisions, but with classmates, and how situations were handled. So it's nice to know that I am fortunate enough to have an administrator that is involved and appreciates and tries to get the standpoint from the teacher as well. Also, school community, and we have a great school community and culture. So the importance of that and having the openness with your colleagues and administrator and even the parents in our school, it's something that I can really appreciate, because if there was a problem, I would like to think that my parents are comfortable enough to just send a quick message and say, hey, this happened today, can you help clarify? Also, one of the things to value is the effectiveness of a powerful principal. If you were to have someone that wanted to review the handbook, wanted to reflect on the handbook, are there any questions? And just providing those opportunities for more PD, more questions and things like that, that's something that I think some people take for granted. All right, moving on. Some of the unresolved issues within this case study, Mrs. Horton's plan for continuing is she wanted to come back next year. Are things at home a little too complicated where she's not going to be able to continue in this profession? Another thing is Uh, will her improvement plan, if she decides to stay, is her improvement plan going to be effective? What steps can they take to make sure that this plan is followed, and that moving in the right direction? On a different note, understanding where Mr. Stafford's child goes. After their meeting, he left, and it wasn't the most professional meeting. So at this point, maybe Mr. Stafford's student does need to be moved, but do they do that? Because then there's going to be other students and parents that may decide, oh, I've heard that this person moved. My child needs to move too. So just kind of figuring that one out. And also contacting the parents, maybe sending something saying there was an issue, everything is resolved. If you ever have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to ask, just to kind of clear the air. This next component is about promoting the academic success and enhancing instructional capacity among all students. So once again, having an effective improvement plan for Mrs. Horton where there's a whole new mindset with her class, her students are taking on a new task, and they're changing their attitudes. I think this will kind of help move students in the right direction. Making sure, don't just set an improvement plan, make sure to have check-ins and reflections where this plan, okay, we're kind of off track, we need to move back towards this, and also not being afraid to make changes. Sometimes students change. I know my own class this year, we've had to make multiple changes throughout the year because students, they learn one thing and you have to kind of accommodate. So making sure that the plan it's adjustable. They can accommodate things so the plan works for everyone. This next component is promoting the well-being of every student. This is just something that, even without this case study, I think this is one of the most vital things that you can do, because if students feel safe and welcomed and loved, you can almost guarantee that they will be successful. So providing the necessary training for staff. I know that I was able to attend a PD this past winter, and it was a Teach Like a Rock Star, and it was just about how teachers can make that connection with students on a deeper level. So not being afraid to, obviously you have a line that you have to watch and not cross over, but showing the students, letting them know that you love them, that you value that they are there, making sure to communicate with their parents. This is what's happening in the school. Having that student interaction with other colleagues too, to kind of, this is where you'll be next year, look what you can work towards, this could be your teacher, and just having that positive interaction. And then that would help kind of improve the school's culture, so the school can be a fun place for students to experience success. And then that can kind of carry with them out in the real world. This last component is enhancing the instructional capacity, not as a student now, but as a school leader. So making sure to make this best decision. You always have to make sure that you're looking at the students' they should be your number one priority. Obviously staff is very important, but this is about the students' well-being. So making sure that the school and the people inside the school are the best people that are there for the job, that they can get the job done. Providing this PD for the staff so everyone has a common ground of expectations. Also in these PD meetings, not everything has to be an agenda. You can have time to kind of socialize, and that relationship building portion is essential for an effective and successful school. And the last thing I kind of added was monitoring that improvement plan. I know I've kind of hit on that multiple times, but I just think that's something that's really important. I myself we set goals at the beginning of the year, but it's not something we refer back to. So making sure that the improvement plan is being reflected on, changes are being made, accommodations are there. Even if that means that the administrator has to be seen in the classroom more, so more walkthrough observations, and they're just going to drop in and just make their presence known, I think that could help with teachers being more effective. And then in turn, the administrator in the school will be as effective as they can be. So this is my Module 13. Thank you for watching.